Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. A few weeks back I showed you a video on making this bag. Now my mission for this particular bag was all about the fabric. I had a piece of vinyl and some scrap pieces of upholstery fabric, and I wanted to use up as much of the fabric as I could without any wastage. So out of that long strip of vinyl, what I've got left are these three pieces. Now this one is earmarked for my next project, but I have these two pieces for today's and lots of scrap bits of the upholstery fabric. So my mission is to make 3 different bags out of the same 2 pieces of fabric. Today we're going to be using these 2 pieces and some of the fabric, have it fully lined, zips and pockets. I'm not really sure, I have no plan whatsoever, but you guys will already know because you'll have seen the thumbnail. So the one I did a few weeks ago has a pocket on the outside of the bag. It's got my nice brushed metal label on there, and on the inside it's got a zip at the top. It's not the recessed zip, it's folded down and inserted, and it also has a pocket on the inside. So I'll try and do something a little bit different to this one, and we'll see what I can come up with. Stick around. All right, here are my plans so far. Of course, they're subject to change depending on how much I muck this up. What I've got are the 2 pieces of vinyl. I plan on putting the vinyl piece in the center of the bag. So I'll have one for the front and one for the back. And I've cut some upholstery fabric strips, the same size for the front and the back, so they're going to be on either side of that vinyl piece in the centre. This will be the front. Then I think I'm going to have some kind of a flap coming around the bag to close it, so I won't be putting a zip in, but it will have a magnetic closure on the vinyl and on the flap. I'll have a couple of handles on the side, so I've got some rectangular rings and a slide buckle thing. I've got some lining fabric. I don't know how much of that I need yet until I actually put these 3 pieces together and line the back of this. What I'm going to also do is, instead of using pins and clips today, I'm doing a double-sided tape test in another video. So today I'm using Tissart fabric tape, which I got off Amazon, and I'm going to see how this goes in regard to gumming up needles. That's part of my double-sided tape test, which will be coming up probably in a few weeks' time. The other thing I want to do is put one of my really nice metallic labels on here, but because it's a brushed gunmetal grey, I'm not sure that it'll go with my hardware. So I may not put anything on the front. We'll see. So I'll set all of those bits aside for the time being. I'm going to sew up my front and back pieces. All right, let's get started with this tape. I have 7 different double-sided tape products to try. I'm trying to find the best one for all my needs. I've called it Tissart. It's Tsart. Tsart. I don't know how that's pronounced. Okay, so what I'm going to do is run some double-sided tape along the edge of my fabric and just secure those layers together. If you don't have access to double-sided tape and you want to make this project, just use some clips or pins. I'll peel the tape back and I'll place my vinyl piece on top and grab the other piece and I'll place that piece of fabric on top of the vinyl. So with my fabric sandwiched together like that, I can now sew down this long edge and this long edge. Once I've done that, I will top stitch, and I'll probably top stitch to the fabric side rather than the vinyl side. We'll see when we get to the machine. So I'll do the same for the other one. So these are both ready to go to the machine and have the side seam sewn and then top stitched. Okay, I'm ready to start sewing. I have my fabric under the machine. I'm using my new magnetic seam guide that Richard suggested I purchase. So previously I was using something a lot smaller and it would move. This has got a super strong magnet on it, and it's got an adjustable flappy thing there where you can adjust it depending on the thickness of your fabric. It's my first time giving this a go. The needles I'm using today are 110-18. I have actually quite often used just the regular size 14 universal needles with vinyl and upholstery fabric before as well. So you just have to go a little bit slower. And I have a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. And I'll use that throughout the whole project. Let's get started. Using the double-sided tape is really handy because it means none of the fabric is going to shift as I'm sewing. Before I top stitch, I'll do the other pieces. It's usually now when I decide which way I'm going to top stitch, whether I top stitch to the fabric or the vinyl. In this case, I'm going to top stitch the seam onto the fabric side, and to give me a nice even top stitch, I'm going to be watching the left toe of my presser foot here, and I'm just going to be looking at the center front there, and I'll line that up along the edge of the fabric as I sew, and that should hopefully give me a nice straight edge. So just make sure that your seam is to the right as you're sewing. And then we'll repeat that for the other side as well. Okay, with that one done, we'll do the other one as well. Okay, what I've done is lined the fabric up wrong sides together, just because it sits better that way. And I've lined up the center panels, and I've lined them up as evenly as I can across the top and bottom edges. I need to make sure that both pieces of fabric are the same size before I measure for my lining. So I am going to line up one of these lines along the straight edge of the fabric and cut off as little as I can. So I've straightened up the edge there. My blade's a little bit blunt. I should go and change that. And what I've done is just made a little nick in each section, and then I've scissor cut it so that I don't go and injure myself. I'll go and change my blade now, and then I'll turn this around, and then I'll trim this back so that both edges line up nice and straight. All right, I've got a new blade on, and let's see how this goes now. It's like cutting through butter. It's amazing what the difference it makes when you change your blade. All right, I've got everything cut to the size that I need now. So what I've got here, this will be my front flap fabric, and I've cut that at 8 by 13 centimetres or 3 by 5 inches, one for the outer and one for the lining. And the interfacing is going to be 2 3/8 by 4 3/8 or 6 by 11 centimetres. That's going to be fused to the wrong side of the lining fabric. The finished size of my fabric pieces for the front and back at the moment are 30 by 33 centimetres or 11 3/4 inches by 13 inches. That means the lining is going to be cut out at 30 centimetres wide or 11 3/4 inches, but rather than having two separate pieces for the front and back, I'm going to have one whole piece, no seam at the bottom, and the opening will be along the side seam somewhere. So that means our lining will be 30 by 64 centimetres or 11 3/4 by 25 1/4 inches. I've also cut another piece of fabric for the lining, and that's going to be for our little fold over flap that's going to have the magnetic closure on it. So my front flap pieces are 8 by 13 centimetres or 3 by 5 inches, and we need one each for the lining and the main, and we also need some stabiliser. I'm using a 100% cotton interfacing and a little bit extra. So this is 6 by 11 centimetres or 2 3/8 by 4 3/8 inches, and I've got a small square cut out that's a little bit bigger than the magnetic closure that I'm going to use. I want to shape the front flap, so what we're doing here is folding that in half and make a mark in the centre there, and then on either side we'll come up 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. We're going to create a curve, and then just get anything that you've got that's got a rounded edge and curve that as best you can. Now that 1 centimetre curve is just a guide. It can be whatever you want it to be. I'll fold that in half and cut around that curve. On the other side of that, I'll come up 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch and just mark across in the centre there. That is where I want to place my little square of fabric, so that will sit right over the top there, and when we put our closure on later, that'll just give that little bit of extra reinforcement. What I'll do now is place this piece of interfacing to the wrong side of our fabric, and you want to line that up so that it's centered evenly all the way around. Remember, I've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'll place this underneath and I'll fuse that together. So with the measurements that we've used earlier, I've just found that mark that we've made underneath. I'll make a mark in the back of the fabric, so this is the lining. Put the point of your seam ripper in at the bottom of the mark that you've made, and with the point of the seam ripper come up to the top of the mark that you've made. And you're better off going small rather than large, so you don't have to go all the way to the outer edge. You can stay within that blue line. And with the point sticking out at the top here, all you need to do is rip. So you've created a hole inside here for your clasp, and you haven't accidentally sliced any further. You can always make your hole bigger if you need to, but you can't go smaller if you cut too much. So slice that open. I'll take one of the sides and place that through the holes that I've made, and place the washer on top and spread the prongs apart. And we'll set the other side aside for the time being. Take the outer flap fabric and place that right side up. The other one can go right side down, and we will sew straight down the long edges here and around the curve. You don't need to sew the top because we're going to leave that open for turning through, and that will be hidden away in the top of the bag. So you can pin or clip that in place and sew it up. Because I'm doing that double-sided tape test, I'm going to tape the outer edges. I'll set that aside and we can prepare our handles. So what I've done is cut 2 pieces of fabric that are 71 by 4.7 centimetres and a piece of webbing that's the same length, which is 28 inches by 1 7/8 inch for the fabric. And I've gone with that measurement partly because the double-sided tape that I'm using is 6 millimetres or 1/4 of an inch. And that means my fabric is going to be turned over by 1/4 of an inch on either side. Again, I'm going to run some tape along this. This is where double-sided tape is really handy. So I'll run the tape all the way along the top edge and the bottom edge, making sure that's nice and straight. We're using this tape as our guide for turning the fabric over. So once you've got the tape in position, peel the paper off, and all you want to do is fold the fabric over exactly on the edge of the tape. And we'll repeat for the other side. Once you've got these edges folded over, then you can position your webbing directly over the top. So it's up to you if you want to clip or pin the edges or use your double-sided tape. I've got so much of it to use, I might as well use it up. So we'll run that right along the edges there and secure that in place. Once I've done that one, I'll do the same for this. Okay, my handles are ready to be stitched together. I'm going to sew really close to the outer edge of the black on the strapping on both sides. And this is ready now for me to sew around the long sides and the bottom edge. Then I can trim that back. Something else I've done, and this is a problem I had with the last bag that I made, is this crease in the vinyl. So a couple of people mentioned to me that you can iron the crease out carefully, and that's what I've tried to do. So I actually intentionally put a crease in a little bit of extra vinyl, and I've used a Teflon sheet, and the heat melted the top layer of the vinyl off, which is actually quite handy to know because that could actually be useful. But anyway, I'm going to have to live with that crease. Because that's there, I've decided that I'm actually going to put my brushed metal label over that position further down in the construction of this bag. So that will at least hide that crease on one side. The other side of the fabric will be closer to the body, so nobody will really notice that. Not much I can do about that. I'm not confident enough to go and iron this and perhaps run the risk of the vinyl peeling off. If you have any suggestions as to what I can do with future vinyl projects, let me know. Can you see that little bit of red fluff on the needle up there? That's because the sticky residue from the double-sided tape is sticking to the needle. For that reason, I'm not going to change to black thread when I do my handles. I'm just going to leave it all in burgundy because the gum makes it really difficult to rethread the needle, and I don't want to waste a needle just yet. I'm going to consider this double-sided tape that I'm testing a fail for my needs, but we can continue on. Start sewing at the top. We'll stitch right down along the outside edge of that interfacing and come up along the other side. And as I said, I'm going to sew right on the very edge of that black strapping. And to prevent the handle from twisting out of shape, I'm going to start at the same edge when I do the other side. So the edges are now nicely secured in place, and I think that's going to be a really nice handle. And we can do the other one. I really like the look of the handle like this, so whether you have that on the outside or the inside, completely up to you. I think I'm actually going to make this, as I said, a design feature and have that showing on the outside of the bag. I can set that aside for the moment. With the flap for the bag, we can just trim the curve close to the edge, and we can just clip that as well, just to make the edge sit a little bit better. And then we can turn this the right way around, and that will need to be top stitched. I'll actually taper the edges in as well to make it easier to turn through. Once you've turned it the right way around, just shape the edge on the curve, flatten out the side seams, and then we can go and top stitch. I'll quickly go and do that now. So that flap is done now, and it can be attached to one side of our bag. So now you can place this with the outer fabric faced down over the centre of the vinyl here. So if I fold that in half and make a mark right in the centre, and I'll double check that my measurement is the same, 2 and a bit and 2 and a bit inches. So this outer fabric can now be placed directly over the top, and I've got the centre of the flap there. Line that up along the top, and I'll quickly go and sew that in place as well. So the flap has been sewn in position, and I've just done that really close to the top edge there, and that means that this, when you have the back of the bag and the front, this flap will sit over the top, which also means that we can now mark the position for our magnet on this side, and while we're at it we might as well put our label on here as well. What I've done here is found the centre position for my magnetic closure, and I've measured down 1 3/4 inches or 4.5 centimetres, and I've marked my lines for my washer. For my brushed metal label, I'm going to hide that fold, so that's going to sit directly over the top there, and you'll barely notice any of that crease. Now we need to stabilise this a little bit more. I don't want to tear the vinyl. So what I've done on the back here is placed some stabiliser just with some double-sided tape for my label and for the magnetic closure, and I'll open those sections up the same way I did before with the seam ripper. Just go in gently, make sure your fingers aren't behind the pointy bit. Come up just before you finish your ink mark, and I'll do the same down here for the label. And we can put those bits of hardware in place. To finish this off, I'm going to protect the metal plates here. Well, actually what I'm going to do is protect the lining from these metal plates. A viewer mentioned this in one of their comments recently, and if you place some fusible fleece over the top of that, then that'll prevent these metal bits from rubbing against the lining and tearing the lining. So I think that was a great suggestion, and that's what I'm going to do now. As I said, I'm not confident with the vinyl not melting, so I'm going to use some double-sided tape and fuse that down. If you're not certain about it, you can always stitch it, go back over the top stitching and secure it in place. But I think double-sided tape will be enough because this stuff is pretty permanent. Thank you to the viewer that recommended I do this. I think that was a brilliant idea, and I apologise for not remembering who that was. My name tag's in place, the magnetic closure is in place. I don't like that they're different colours, but when the bag is closed you won't notice that at all, although you will notice the little buckle on the side later. That's almost hidden that crease. Now my original intention was to have a couple of tabs coming off from the side of the bag and then have the handles attached to it that way. But when I worked out the sizing for my handles, I didn't take into account what I've got available in hardware. And I think if I put the available hardware on, it's just a little bit tight, and it looks tight. So I'm going to have to change that plan and attach my handles just by sewing them in. It's not what I wanted, but that's what we're going to be doing. So the handle size that I've got once I trim it back is going to be 27.5 inches. I'm not sure what that is in centimetres. I'll put it up on the screen. And I'm going to attach that as is. So I've gone and cut both my handles to the same size. Really doesn't matter what size you make your handles. Mine are at 27.5 inches. It gives you just enough room to hang over your shoulder, and then you can hang it over your arm if you wanted to. So to position the handles, you've got to decide whether or not you want the black showing or you want the red showing on the outside. I want to make a feature of it. To do that, I'm going to place the black side down, and I'll position that 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch from the edge of the fabric here. Make sure your handles are nice and even all the way around. You don't want them twisted at this point. Oh, well, you don't want them twisted at any point, do you? So that was 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. And then when you are wearing the bag, you'll be able to see the handles like that. I think I like that. I'll show you the other way. So if I wanted to have the black on the inside, I'd have the black facing up. So you can either have your handles like that or with the black on the outside. Do you know, I think now that I'm looking at it, there's too much black on there, so I'm going to turn this around and have the black on the inside. So that means when you're wearing the bag, you're going to have the black coming around your shoulder or your arm, and you won't see it so much. I think less is more in this case. Thanks for your help working through that one. So I think that is actually going to look much better. Yeah, most definitely. I do still wish I had hardware that was wide enough for the handle. I'm going to quickly go and sew those handles in place now. I think I made the right decision by not showing off the black too much. All right, we can set these aside for the time being. What we're going to do is work on the lining, and I think I'd like to put a pocket in the lining. For the welt pocket, I'm going to use black since I've got the black in the handles and it just brings everything together. We need 24 centimetres by 48 centimetres, which is 9.5 by 19 inches. And we have our lining piece already cut. We're going to take our lining fabric and we'll mark a line 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch from the top. And then we'll draw another line the same distance from that. And then from the outside edge here, we're going to measure the same distance again. So 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch, and we'll close up that rectangle. And then we need to mark a line through the centre of that. We don't want to mark our centre line all the way to the outside edge. What we're going to do is come in from the corner and mark a triangle. And what's going to happen here is that we'll be cutting through the centre and into the corner as well, but we're not going to cut beyond those lines that we've drawn. So we've got a really nice rectangle here. What you can do with that is grab your lining, and with the right side up, we're going to mark a line that is 2 centimetres or 1 inch from the top, and find the centre. And we'll find the centre of our pocket piece and line up the top edge of the pocket piece on that 2.5 centimetre or 1 inch line and line up the centre. And just double check that you've got that same measurement across the top, and we can pin that in place. And what we're going to do is sew around the rectangle. So we're not going to sew the middle line, we're going to sew the outer rectangle all the way around. So even though I'm sewing much lighter fabric, I haven't bothered to change my needle because I'm simply too lazy to do that. So when you get to the corner, raise your foot, turn your work and continue to the next. And come back around to the side that you started and finish that up. Okay, once you've sewn that rectangle, we can cut right across that centre line. And then we can cut into the corner, but not through the stitching line. Bring the pocket to the other side. And this is where you're going to need to get the iron and give this a really nice press and just make sure that the black fabric is sitting on the black side and that the burgundy is sitting on the burgundy side. You want to try and avoid any pleats in the corner here, and that will be from not cutting close enough to the corners. Once you've done that, from this opening here, you can measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres, and on that drawn line you'll fold that up to close up that little window that we've got here. So you can do that either by drawing in a line. The other way you can measure it is just to bring the fabric all the way up to the top and then fold it down until the fabric just meets the top edge of the window there. So you may have accidentally sewn your window too big or too small, and if that's the case, that's an easy way to line up your fabric. So you can either measure it or just fold it up and down. So with that in place there, I'll pop a couple of pins in on the side, flip it over, and this is going to be a little welt pocket here. So we'll go all the way around here, but make sure that you don't stitch over this little pocket opening. It really doesn't matter where you start. So I've got my pocket out of the way. And once you've sewn that all the way around, we can turn this around, bring the bottom edge of the pocket up to meet with the top edge, and I'll flip that around and just bring in the side edge, and then just fold the lining fabric forward, bring the top section down, and bring the side over. And what we're going to do is with the lining side faced up, so from the bottom up, across and down, and then that's our pocket finished. Now you'll notice that I'm sewing over this burgundy flap here. It really doesn't matter, it's not necessary. It just so happens that that's how wide my seam allowance is. Okay, so our pocket is completely finished now, and there's quite a lot of space in there. Now I was too lazy to change my needle back to something more appropriate for this fabric. I would have done a lot better stitching had I put the correct needle on, so it is recommended. All right, we're now ready to start boxing our corners and sewing up the seams. So what I've done with my lining fabric here is I've got the opening of the pocket section facing the other side of the lining. So I've just got that folded up together, and you'll see the pocket flap is sitting on the outside. So that's the wrong side of our lining. And I've got my 1 centimetre seam allowance marked in on the sides there. I don't need to do that on the bottom because there's a fold. We won't be sewing the bottom fold. On the outer fabric, I've also marked in my 1 centimetre seam allowance along the sides and the bottom. And this is really just so that you can see what I'm doing. We now want to make our boxed corners. Line up your lining fabric, and all I want to do is mark 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the stitching line. So this is going to be my stitching line, and I'm going to place my 1 inch mark or 2.5 centimetre mark on that line, and from the fold up will also be 1 inch. We've got a nice square corner here for the bottom of our bag. When you're boxing corners, you need to make sure you take your seam allowance into account. We'll repeat that for this side. Set that one aside for a moment, and we'll grab our main fabric. And this one is slightly different because we have a seam at the bottom. So what we're going to do is measure that 2.5 centimetres from the seam line on both sides, not from the bottom edge. So I'm lining up my ruler on that drawn line, and repeat that for the other side. That's our corners boxed. What we can do now is place the fabric together. So I'm just going to place right sides together, line up the corners at the bottom. I'll pin that together so that it doesn't shift. And then we can cut out that mark we've just made. So that's our corners boxed, and we can now pin the rest of it together, and it can be sewn down the side seams and along the bottom. With your lining, we're going to cut this out as well. And it looks a little bit out of square, but don't forget you've got that seam allowance on the side here. Once you take that into account, you'll have a nice square corner. So once you've pinned both pieces together, we'll sew down both side seams and along the bottom for the main. For the lining, we'll sew all the way down one side, and with the other side, we'll come down a few inches, leave a really good space here for an opening because we're turning vinyl and upholstery through. So I want to make sure I leave a big enough gap, and then sew from here down to the bottom. Let's go to the machine. Okay, I'll start off with the lining fabric first. And this is the side that I'm going to leave the opening, so I'll backstitch here, come down a fair way and backstitch again here, and then just come up the other side. Now with the outer fabric, because I'm using upholstery fabric, I'm going to double stitch this. I'm just using a regular Gutermann sew-all thread. Because it is just a regular thread, I do like to give this fabric a little bit of extra support. So I'll go back over that again. The reason I just use a regular thread, which is really just this kind of thread here, is because it saves me having to go and buy anything else. With the amount of colours that we use in our sewing, it's much easier to use my sew-all thread stitched twice than have to have 50 different colours in something a lot thicker. Now I'm coming over the section where the vinyl and the fabric have been sewn together, so I'm going to backstitch over that. Give it a little bit of extra support, and I'll do the same at the other intersection. All right, with our side seams done, there's very little to go. Finger press a crease at the bottom of the lining. And that's to help you line up the other side seam. Pull the fabric apart here, and that was a fold that I'd pinched together. Line that up with the seam that you've just created. And it's your decision whether you want to open your seams. I like to move them over to one side, clip that in place. I'll repeat that for the other side. And that's ready to go to the machine and have a 1 centimetre seam allowance sewn on both corners. This one here, pull the fabric apart again, and we do have that seam at the bottom to contend with. So what I'm going to do is move that seam over to my left, the side seam over to my right, and sew across here, and repeat for the other side. Because I've pushed the seam for the base of the bag to one side, I'm going to follow that along for the other end, and that will mean this side seam will move over to my left instead of my right. And that can be sewn right across there. Let's go and close up the corners. With the outer fabric, I'm going to double stitch this again, just like I did on the sides. it's time to put the outer fabric and the lining together. So just place the handles to the inside. This is the side that's got my magnetic snap and my label. So I'm going to flip that down, take the lining fabric, and we'll turn that the right side out. You can see we've got a little opening on the side for turning through later. The side that has the pocket on it, we'll face that up and have that facing the side of the bag that has nothing happening on it. We can line up the side seams now, and this seam here is going to my left, and I'm going to line up this seam facing my right. You can open your seams out if you want. I'm used to doing it this way, so I tend to stick with it. And again, this one here is facing my right, so I'll do the lining seam to my left. And then we can evenly line everything else up. Okay, we can take this back to the machine and sew all the way around with our 1 centimetre seam allowance. Once we've done that, we can turn the bag the right way around, double check that everything looks the way it's supposed to, then we can line everything up to top stitch. I've turned my bag the other way around because I like my main fabric to be faced up and the lining fabric to be faced down. And where the handles are, I'll triple stitch over each one. And I'll do the same for the section where that little fold over flap is. Once all that's sewn up, find your opening and bring the bag around the right side. Poke all your corners and everything out that you need to. Line up the top edge so that it's nice and even for your top stitching. Okay, I'm ready to do the top stitching. I've got the lining sitting nicely underneath. And once again, I've turned my bag so that the outer fabric is facing up. That way I can see the top stitching and make sure everything's looking really nice. When you come to the flap, you want to make sure that's sitting away, just like your handles. I've also increased my stitch length to 3.5. It wouldn't hurt if you did it a little bit longer either. I've changed to my Teflon foot because I forgot that I was sewing over the vinyl, and when I went over the first section of the vinyl, the machine wasn't feeding through properly, so my stitches are really tiny. Changing my foot to suit a vinyl fabric is much easier for the stitching. So that made a huge difference sewing through the vinyl. My stitches are much more consistent and even, and the fabric fed through the machine easily. On the other side, it's not very good. And once you've checked your bag to make sure everything looks right, go back to your opening and we'll just pinch those edges together and close up the side seam. And there we have it. Once you've turned everything the right way around and you've got all your corners sitting out nicely, we've got our nice long shoulder straps and a perfectly functional bag. I stupidly forgot to put my Teflon foot on, and you can see the stitching here once I remembered. It was really nice and even. Have a look at the other side. Everything's really tight. I couldn't even steer straight because the fabric was dragging so much. I'm not going to undo it. The stitches are way too tiny. Thankfully, it's on the back of the bag and it's unlikely to be noticed by a non-sewer. So we've got our flap over the top there. Nice little badge on the front. Box corners are lined up. Our seams are mostly lined up underneath. and I think that's a really nice effect. And this was the first one that I did a few weeks back using exactly the same fabric, just a different layout. On the inside of this bag that we've just done today is our welt pocket, and with the other one we've got a zippered pocket on the back and another zippered pocket on the inside. So these are the first two bags out of that fabric. Which one do you like best so far? I like both of them, but I'm not sure which one I prefer. We'll see when we get all three of them done. So what do you think of this bag? Apart from a little hiccup with the stitching on the vinyl at the back, I'm really pleased with how this one's turned out. I have no real plan when I start making these bags. It's just about using up the fabric for me and trying to do something a little bit differently. I like the magnetic snap closure at the top there. I don't think it really matters that they don't match either. Although thinking about it now, I was originally going to put the sliders on the side, so I could have used my silver one. Doesn't matter, it's done now. It's hidden away. Nobody's ever going to see that it's the wrong colour. And most people don't really take much notice of that. But regardless, I'm happy of how it's turned out. And having that deep pocket on the inside, I think will be perfect for somebody to put their phone and bits and pieces inside. I actually like the size of this too. And I think I'd like to make a crossbody bag in this size using some of the upholstery boards that I've got. I might make up a batch of crossbody bags around about this size with a flap going over the top in a video soon. What do you think? So there's today's bag, the one I did a few weeks ago. Both can be shoulder bags, or you can just drape them over your arm. So that's those two bags. I have a little bit of fabric left. There's that bit of vinyl, and then I have a piece of fabric that I think might be long enough for handles, and then a few scraps of fabric left over to make bag number 3 out of this fabric and vinyl. So that way I'll get rid of all of those bits and pieces. It'll be interesting to see what I come up with next. I have something in mind, but that's subject to change anyway. I hope you've enjoyed this video and this bag, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.